to talk about some of the Okay. Well, my hope today is to excite some of you into trying new things, trying large things, and trying to make a real difference in society. Much has been written about the startup world, but people think it's all about software, and it's not. So I hope to convince you that every part of societal infrastructure can be changed by entrepreneurs and technology. Both have a very, very important role to play. Let's start with the basic problem. When we look at the world today, out of 7 billion people, something like 10% have a rich lifestyle, rich in energy, how much transportation they have, housing they have, medical services, education. All 7 billion people on the planet want it. And we can't get from here to there without two things. Dramatically reducing the amount of resources we need per person. And we need to multiply resources and making it much cheaper and more accessible. So it's quite important that we look at this problem that way. And technology is the only thing I know of that can multiply resources. Turn a ton of cement or steel into 10 tons effectively. Let me talk about reinvention, because to do this, we have to make this available to everybody on the planet. We have to think about things very differently. And some of the things I will say will feel surprising to you, but I've thought about it a lot, and at least these are my views. The big levers we have. I have a personal belief that almost any problem, if we define it correctly, we can find a technological solution. When I turned 60, I said, what part of US, and I was looking at the US, GDP, non-governmental GDP, can I not think of a way to reinvent personally? And I was surprised to learn after a few months of exercise that there was not a single area, because whenever you try invention, innovation, new things, new approaches, you are very likely to fail. In fact, my personal view is if I'm not failing often enough, I'm not taking enough risk. I'm being too conservative. And I hate not failing because it tells me I'm too conservative. And you almost have to be naive to try some of these things. Whether Elon Musk says, I can launch things into space for 1/100th the cost that NASA has. Or somebody like Jeff Bezos saying, I can start retailing better than Walmart can. These are unreasonable assertions, but single entrepreneurs with vision and a lot of good luck luck is always a big part of any success, is needed. But you almost have to be naive, you have to have hubris, you really have to have the right attitude, the right attempts, and iterate your way to success on things that seem very improbable. This is one of my favorite quotes. When you have a large vision, most people adapt themselves to what the world wants or says, and most people do the conventional thing. If 5% of you do unusual things, 1 out of 20, you will change the world just in this room. There's probably 1,200, 1,300 people here. 50 good startups out of that could completely change India. And that's my urging to all of you. Also, Silicon Valley is not a place in my mind, it's a culture. It's a culture of we can do things. Yeah, there's a lot of arrogance, but there's also this attitude towards nurturing, tolerating failure, and developing disruptive innovation despite many failures along the way. It's a culture, and supported by entrepreneurs, by technologists, by investors, by managers, by everybody. And so, look at some of these examples. Let me also say something else that has been very important to me. Whenever I look at the world, people, and especially large companies, and I'll come back to that, look at what is likely to succeed and they do those things. That to me is incremental innovation. It's not radical innovation. In fact, I will come to this in a minute. No large innovation in my career, the last 40 years since I've been in Silicon Valley, has come from a large company. No matter how much resources they have, it's always a technologist, entrepreneur, trying some rational, irrational things. So, any sensible manager in any company will say, try things that are likely to succeed. I would assert that in large societal transformation, incremental innovation seldom gets there. Most people think improbable events are unimportant. I would assert that improbable events are the only things that are important. The only thing. Uber was an improbable innovation. The electric car was an improbable innovation. You look at any large transformation, it was something improbable. 10 years before, nobody believed it was likely. And then it happened. And it happened through a series of innovations that seemed small initially. Think the shape of an exponential curve. Very flat in the beginning, seems harmless, and then it explodes. That's the nature of every large technology. The other thing is, most people are mostly limited by what they can think they can do. I can sit with almost anybody and challenge them to think beyond their box, and then by the time I'm finished, they say, oh, that's possible. And our job is to try these things. Anybody who doesn't try fails to try. I'd rather fail by trying and failing than failing to try. And 95% of the people fail to try. I say one of my best credits that nobody talks about, I've failed in more ways than anybody I know. Every time it was a learning event that hopefully I don't repeat those mistakes. So let me now talk about the GDP's non-governmental components. After I turned 60, I said I only want to work on really interesting things or I should go retire. And I said, if I have interesting things to work on, I can work on it for another 20, 25 years. And there's plenty of people who work that late, Warren Buffett being a classic example. And I was surprised. There's more than 25 years of work to do. So, this surprised me. As I said earlier, almost every area of societal GDP, I could personally come up with a way on how to multiply resources through technology. I said this earlier, no large institution will do any of the really radical multiplicative things. So it depends on entrepreneurs. It was Amazon, not Walmart, that innovated retail. It was YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, not the media companies, that changed media. It was SpaceX, not Airbus and Boeing, that changed space and aviation. Tesla and Waymo did cars, automotive, not Volkswagen and GM. I can go on, you get the idea. No matter which area I looked at in the last 40 years, every large innovation came from some unlikely source. And Google has innovated in so many different ways. Why? Because it's a founder-driven company. It's the founder's vision, not proper management, that has made the difference. The other interesting thing, if you looked at 10 years ago and looked at the startup world, whether it was here or in Silicon Valley, it was only about software and IT. It was only about technical innovation for technology sector. Now it's about most parts of the GDP, whether it's transportation or housing or pick your favorite. The other interesting thing, the more axes of innovation you have, and the more tools you have to combine those axes or experiment with those axes of innovation, the faster innovation will be. This is very exciting because there's been no time like now. So I would guess the next 20 years, well within most people's working careers, we will see more innovation than we've seen in the last 100 years, in my view. So if you want to imagine the year 2040 or 2050, you have to go back before the invention of television or aircraft, probably to the year 1900. If you look at the delta, that's what we'll see in the next 20 or 30 years. And that's really, really exciting. The lower the cost of experimentation, easier it is to try things. The tools, the CAD tools, computational design, all these are expanding in every area. So let me talk about some of these new axes. AI and data collection, but also 3D printing, completely changing things. In biology, it's CRISPR, it's genomics, it's image AI. Quantum computing and cloud computing, software eating the world, social networking really enabling a new style of development, robotics, densification and dematerialization. I'll come back and talk more about this. All of these, and I think we see 20% of the materials we'll know about by 2050. Why? Because computational tools and AI will design new materials in ways we can't imagine. This is what I mean. You combine different areas of innovation, and even in areas like material science, that allow for new innovation to happen. And so there's room for everybody, no matter which part of engineering or technology or science they're working on, or even just math. Turbocharged, of course, by all the older innovations that by now are trying to play a big role. All these, think of them as a soup of technologies out of which you can do new innovative projects. So let me talk about a few individual areas that can be very exciting. This may seem like a radical view, but I think in 25 years or 30 years, and timing is very hard to predict for innovation. So when I say 25 years, it could be 15 years or 35 years. It's hard to tell. So I don't ever predict exact timing. Consumers will make all their healthcare decisions, including levels like, do I want to have surgery for a torn ACL in my knee? Why? Because expertise will reside in the AI system, and the consumer will have a preference. Oh no, I'm 50, I don't want to play soccer anymore, so I don't want surgery. Those are the levels of personal choices consumers will make, not depend on what a doctor tells them based on their personal biases. Mostly today, consumers get the treatment based on the doctor they get, not on the right theoretical decision. That's why every healthcare system in a country, advanced country like the United States, has their own care paths and their care practices. So you go to a different hospital, you get a different preferred treatment. That should not be the case. That is the world of expert opinion, mostly invalid, because they can't all be right if you get 5 different suggestions. Data, biomarkers, images about ourselves every day, quantitative physicals. Let me give you an example of biomarkers. Today, when you do a blood test, you get a chart, maybe 30 biomarkers on it, and doctor check your iron, check your calcium, whatever. And they then theoreticize a disease that you might have. In fact, the body has thousands of biomarkers, and a blood test to cover all of them would be less costly than the way we do it today. And if you have 3,000 or 5,000 biomarkers to look at, you're characterizing every metabolic pathway in the body. You will discover disease, but if you have humans looking at it, they can't look at that many data points. This is why AI systems will do better diagnosis. So a single finger prick blood test may give you 100 or 1,000 times more data than your doctor uses today. And then the right AI systems will be able to use it. Imaging has gotten to the point where the Journal of the American Medical Association has said they will no longer accept papers that say that AI is better than humans at looking at an image. Think about it. They won't even consider it novel enough to publish because it's been proven so many times. Why should you need radiologists then, other than AI radiologists? Now, there is a role for radiologists, but I can come back to it maybe during the questions, or other doctors. It's not to say the human element of care will go away. You don't want an AI telling you you have cancer in 3 months to live. So there will be a human element. There's 7 billion people. Even a thing like aspirin is prescribed at the same dosage for 7 billion people. 30% of the people on the planet do not metabolize aspirin very well. Their dosage should be very different. Statin is one of the most prescribed drugs for cardiac disease. I have not run into a doctor, even an Indian doctor or a cardiologist, who knows that the dosage for Indian genetics is 2 to 3 times higher than for Western standards, which is what's prescribed by every pharma company. Now, there's probably 100,000 facts like that I can point to in healthcare that humans can't comprehend or remember or handle. They will all be done by AI. And care will be personalized to each person in their genetics and their environmental situation and their circumstances. Cancer will be detected through biomarkers, not through feeling a lump. Most disease, Alzheimer's disease, most certainly will be predicted 20 years before the symptoms show up. One of my personal goals is the idea of symptom-based medicine, which is all of medicine today. You feel something, you have a lump, you have a skin rash. Symptom-based medicine should disappear because symptoms appear much, much later than when the problem starts. The problem starts, your biochemistry inside starts changing. A tendon starts rubbing down. Many years later, even a knee replacement started a decade or two before you felt the problem. So symptom-based medicine in modern medicine should disappear. I can go on and on. Almost all primary care will be done in an AI and can be done at almost no cost, about the cost of a Google search, over text messaging, including ordering tests, looking at your x-rays, all that. So everything a GP can do should be done this way. Now the interesting thing is every medical professional will be upskilled. A primary care doctor will know everything the cardiologist does because he has the help of an AI assistant cardiologist or an AI assistant oncologist. So a nurse will be able to do what a primary care doctor can do. A primary care doctor will be able to do what every specialist can do. In fact, one of the funny things is the higher the level of specialty, the easier it will be to automate because it's based on years of cramming. I've talked about this. So it is the only way to do two things: dramatically improve the quality of care, make it consistent across different health systems or different doctors, and to dramatically reduce the cost. If all 7 billion people have to have medical services at the highest level, an ultrasound can't cost $100, which it does in the US. It should cost $1 or 10. And that's entirely possible. So, there's lots of axes of innovation. I won't go through all of them. I'll give you a sense. Today people talk about genomics. Turns out transcriptomics, which is the RNA the gene produces, is more important than genomics. Proteomics, which is the proteins the RNA produce, are more important than the RNA. And metabolomics, which are all the metabolites in your body, are more important than the proteomics. This is why thousands of biomarkers make sense, and this is exactly why humans trying to interpret thousands of biomarkers does not make sense. So omics will be a valuable tool. All these tools will become useful axes for innovating in medicine. And to me, the most important part is accessibility of this at very low cost to everybody, independent of whether they can afford it or not. We are even working with 3D printed organs, micro-robots for the body, all those things. But the same is true in transportation. We have to be carbon minimal, we have to be pervasive. I'm going to say there's a fairly high probability, not a certainty, that in 25 years the notion of cars will go away. Cars will be as specialized as mainframe computers are today. They won't go away, but the production will decline by 80% or more. Why? Because in the world of autonomous, it's possible to have public transportation at far less than what public transportation costs today and make it point-to-point. Only reason we have big buses and big trains is because you need a driver. And if you have big buses and big trains and they're expensive to run, you have to schedule them infrequently. Every bus route or train route has a schedule. Now imagine if everything was autonomous and say even in dedicated lanes. The right size vehicle is 2 people because it's autonomous. If it's 2 people, you need a vehicle in the middle of the night, unscheduled at midnight. It'll come to you when you arrive at the station, not when it's scheduled. Not only that, it'll not stop anywhere except your final stop. So this whole idea of using these technologies in unusual ways, the idea of Uber, where it's point to point, anywhere to anywhere within a city, long distance is a little bit harder, would be really, really exciting and much cheaper. I've done some calculations. Every public transit system in the US loses money. The New York train system loses $13 billion a year. It could cut fares in half and make money with these kinds of technologies on the same rails. And autonomy in constrained environments is so much easier. So, I won't go through all the examples, but I've given you, there's at least a dozen projects in flying taxis. Of course, Elon Musk is also claiming he'll have New York to Shanghai in 30 minutes in a rocket. We'll see about that, but it is exciting to see that people are trying unusual things. We just funded a project to fly at Mach 5, about 5,000 kilometers an hour. Think about it. Their goal is London to New York in 90 minutes. You can go for lunch. I don't know whether any of these will work, but the whole point is to try them and see how radical you can be. Again, lots of tools for axes for innovation. And this is what I harp on. You look at these new areas and say, how do you combine them to make new models possible? I was here in 1971 when in our systems control theory, we studied the model for BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit in San Francisco in 1971, was one of our courses. And that model, you can simulate everything. And a computational simulation will let you design experiment with all kinds of systems at very low cost. Turns out in public transportation, if you just had bicycle lane width, you can do 20,000 passengers an hour if you run the right simulation. That's more than most light rail systems can do. Now, some people say, hey, you can't do anything in housing, construction, cities. Yes, you can. The amount of cement and steel used in all these technologies can go down dramatically. So think about the following example. The average car, at least in the West, is used about 20,000 kilometers per year. If you sort of say it'll be public transit and not personal cars, it'll easily go to 200,000 kilometers a year. You've suddenly, without doing anything, reduced the amount of steel you need for cars by 10x, by 90% or more. It's a real neat trick, but when you imagine unusual ways of doing things, when I tell people we could reduce the amount of steel by 90%, people laugh at me, and I say, take this example. If every car went 10 times further, you don't need steel for every personal car, which is mostly sitting in your driveway. People say, well, buildings need steel. One of my big efforts is to dematerialize construction. How many people know generative design or have heard the term? Hands? All of you mechanical, a few hands go on. All of you mechanical engineers should know this. So if you take a motorcycle and did a finite element analysis of it and said, where don't you need steel? You'd get something I'll show you a picture of in a little bit, but it looks like a pockmarked mesh because you're only managing the structural forces you need and no other material. So you subtract material from a design. Now, 5 years ago, you couldn't make that design, you couldn't manufacture it. Now with 3D printing, you can make that design. So you can dematerialize everything from cars to motorcycles to buildings this way. And that's becoming very, very exciting. And of course, carbon and carbon emissions and environmental footprint is a major interest of mine, but also probably one of the highest priorities for the planet. So densification and dematerialization of city environments. I'll give you a simple example. If you have a small, say 70 or 80 square meter apartment, you can't have a bedroom and a dining room and a living room. But if you had little furniture that moved in and out of the way, you don't need 3 feet in front of the closet other than for 30 seconds in a day when you're taking your clothes out. It could become your desk working space. So I've seen some really interesting robotic furniture where the bed goes up into the roof and suddenly that space is available for a living room. So you can make space go much further, which is making buildings much more efficient. You can Google something like ORI, O-R-I, and see how interesting this is. Multiply space. Why should a restaurant, which is only used at dinner, not be a school or a yoga gym during the day? Reusing space in interesting ways, designing for these environments. And my point is to prove to you that every area of society can be innovated. I've talked about some of these. I won't go through all of them, but I'll give you one example in a minute here. If we can do what I talked about and have public transportation go in a city from anywhere to anywhere, from your house to your office as public transportation, and you don't need cars. Think of all the parking that disappears. That could be gardens and lawns and play spaces and other community spaces. My goal is that in 25 years we replace 80% of cars. Again, the axes of innovation, and I say, what are the tools required to innovate in construction or innovation? And I won't go through all of these again. Like I said, this talk can take 3 hours. I have 100 and some slides which I'm not going to present today. But you get the idea. So let me give you this. This is a 3D printed house, about 80 square meters, that will be delivered this year. Fully 3D printed. Beautiful design, fully 3D printed, half the construction cost of normal construction in California. And it uses far fewer tons of material than cement and steel construction. That's what I mean by dematerializing construction. Reduce the amount of material. If you need a ton of cement, it's a ton of cement. If you can do with half a ton or a quarter of a ton, and this is without generative design, which could start subtracting part of this structure. In one print, it makes the exterior wall, makes the interior wall, puts in the insulation, puts in the holes for plumbing and electrical and all that, as one 3D print in one swoop. This is just the beginning. This is not very innovative, but it's new polymer chemistry. New photopolymers used to do this, so you can print a roof without putting support structures like you do for cement. Why? Because you can harden the material with lasers as you print a roof across. This is just one example. I could give you lots more. Manufacturing is the same thing. Dematerialization just in time. I've talked about generative design. One of the interesting things with dematerialization, 3D printing, robotics, the whole idea of making everything in China will go away. Most things will be manufactured close to where they're used or needed. I'll give you an idea. Somebody was showing me in a PLA object that they had printed for heritage buildings and printing heritage buildings and preserving that. My 27-year-old daughter has a startup that uses PLA to 3D print any furniture. Not only can you print it, you can customize it if you want the sofa 6 inches taller or shorter or longer. You can customize it in 24 hours, get it delivered to you. And when you get tired of it, you can send it back, you can grind it and reuse the material. Talk about sustainability, lower cost, customized design, all that. These are just a few of the examples of manufacturing. So again, I won't go through every one of these points because I don't have enough time. Lots of axes of innovation. I hope many more of you mechanical engineers will look up generative design. Computation is also another area that has not been used enough, either in materials design or drug design, and those are all AI problems. So let me give you some examples. Even robots can be made 10 to 100x cheaper if you use AI for precision, not rigid mechanical structures. Most robot arms are 1 to 3 tons. They can be 50 kilograms. So let me give you some examples. That is a motorcycle that Airbus designed. You can Google Airbus motorcycle. You can see how they subtracted all parts of the motorcycle that weren't structurally needed. And you can do this with finite economical analysis. This is a bicycle frame done the same way. You can do elegant designs with a lot of complexity for almost free. This is a carbon fiber printed 3D bike frame. And carbon fiber, the biggest part is manual labor in hand layout. That gets eliminated. Food and ag, same idea. We need all these things. And I'm going to keep going a little bit faster in the interest of time. We don't have enough land on the planet. The fastest growing category of food is meat. And meat takes way more land and water than any other food product. So, in agriculture, just meat produces more carbon emissions than all cars on the planet. So if we're going to solve these problems, we have to use new axes of innovation. And again, I'll give you an example. Vertical farming is, of course, a new area. You can increase yields between 100 and 1,000-fold per acre. Think about it. That much less land you need. This is the Impossible Burger. How many people have heard about it? A few. You cannot tell the taste. In fact, Burger King started offering it nationally in the US this week. Demand is running 3 times higher than their highest forecast because nobody can tell the difference from real hamburger. But here's the thing. It takes 90% less land area, 80% less liters. Normally, a kilogram of meat will take 3,000 liters of water. And water is a real hard commodity to come by. These are the kinds of innovations that can multiply water use. At least the way it's done. Of course, no cruelty to animals, no cholesterol, so it's healthier. These are examples I want to just give you. This is another example. This is just a standard tractor with machine vision to take out weeds. So you don't need herbicides, you don't need GMO crops. And you can eliminate the use of large-scale chemicals, herbicides and insecticides in agriculture. It's destroying the quality of the soils because it kills everything, including the good bacteria. And so these are the kinds of large innovations. This company was bought by John Deere. And financial services, the same thing. The best insurance should be done without humans, so it's available to everybody. We found generally in lending and in insurance that humans have huge biases on who to lend to. And only the richest people have access because it takes a human a long time and a lot of cost to come up with an insurance policy. Well, if AI systems do this, you can get very low cost lending, and it's starting to happen. Again, lots of axes of innovation. Energy and sustainability, again, one of my favorite areas. We do need an 80% reduction in resources for the most richest people to be able to apply it to everybody. Lots of axes of innovation. Unfortunately, these are not being worked on as much as some of the others. But as silly as it seems, we've just funded a fusion reactor in a startup. We think we can beat the global ITAR fusion effort, hopefully by 30 years, and at 1/10 the cost or 1/100th the cost. That project will be $30 billion by 2050. I hope this happens much faster. Education's the same way. It's not fair, it's not inclusive, it's not high quality, not everybody has access. Lots of axes of innovation. This is one area, if any of you is interested, my wife has a non-profit NGO that makes all educational content through high school available for free, open source. But the most exciting part to me is building an AI tutor. So every student can have a personalized high quality tutor. Tell them what to try next. If they get stuck, to give them a hint on what to try, how to learn best. Map a personal learning path for every student. No amount of teachers can do this. And that's a really exciting project. So anybody interested in working on AI for education, please email me. This is what I was talking about earlier. Most businesses, sensible businesses, reduce the probability of failure to the point where the consequences of success are small and incremental. I think we need more people, hopefully some of you, the 5% I talked about, who will take high risks, have a high probability of failure, but high consequences of success. If there's a 90% chance of failure, then you have a 10% chance of changing the world. And those are really exciting projects. So I'm urging all of you to work on those. So let me stop here. I've talked for a long time, longer than I planned on, but the director told me I could take longer. So let me stop here.
Thank you, sir. like to call our director, Professor V. Ramgopal Rao, on the stage for the much awaited fireside chat.
Yeah, so I'm sure it all looks like a science fiction for many of you. I think that is actually going to be the reality. What you see today, what you read in science fiction, what is eventually is turning out to be a reality. In fact, Dennis Khosla, as you all know, is an alumnus of IIT Delhi, one of our very distinguished alumni, and we are very proud of you.
Thank you.
The alumnus of the future. In fact, I have been spending time with him since this afternoon. He came at 12 noon, and I would say it's a great experience talking to him. But I also let out a secret for him. And now he doesn't take breakfast, he doesn't take lunch, no breakfast, no lunch, no tea, no coffee, no green tea as well. He just takes one meal a day, that is dinner. And that is how he has been living since he is 20 years old. I think for almost 50 years, not even 50 years, maybe 40 years, that is how he has been living his life. So that one meal a day. He also doesn't like to use car, he likes to walk. And he told me that he walks something like 100 kilometers. Is it every week or every month?
Every month.
Every month. So 100 kilometers every month. And when I told this to somebody, they said, but what does he do with all these billions then? Anyway, so that's the fact. And so I think one thing we all would like to know, what are your memories of IIT Delhi? Or rather, what is the craziest thing that you did on this campus? In fact, last week we had Chetan Bhagat here. He narrated some very interesting incidents of him going onto the roof of the building and going to all the places which are banned for students. And can you tell us something about your crazy experiences here?
Well, IIT Delhi was just a beautiful experience for me, very formative, because I was 16 when I joined here. And as I mentioned earlier, academically, this model of system simulation of the bot system in a systems control class, it was in the other building there, has stuck with me. And what I learned at IIT Delhi was to think a certain way. I always say, in your head, whenever you train in one area, you build models of how you think of the world. When you get a very diverse education, because we did electrical engineering, systems, we even did material science. It was the only engineering school where we actually had to make castings and pour steel. I don't know if that's still done today. Most people I run into haven't poured castings on their own for steel or machined them afterwards. It built lots of different models in my head. And I think that has really served me my whole life. And I encourage everybody, especially the students here, to not just be electrical engineering or just be mechanical engineering. Be cross-disciplinary, because you'll build different models. And every time you learn something, you learn it with a different model. When you connect those models, you can relearn any area. I've talked a lot about medicine, but 5 years ago, I knew nothing about medicine. I just completely learned it from scratch by studying the area. So those of you who are interested, I should mention this. First, my email address was up there. You can email me. But this whole talk is a 50-page paper I wrote on medium.com, called Reinventing Societal Infrastructure with Technology. It has a lot more details. I published it a year and a half ago. but I've been developing it for 3 or 4 years. And for those of you interested in my views on medicine, and I hinted at my views, I wrote a 100-page paper called 20% Doctor Included. And I defined not only where medicine is today, but why and how it can become much cheaper and much higher quality over 25, 30 years. And so it's a 100-page, well-referenced document that I'd encourage all of you. But all of this came from my learning at IIT on how to learn new areas. So more than any other subject, I learned how to learn. The other thing I found was very exciting about IIT for me, people said always IITs are very rigid. They were not. When I started at the age of 16, there was no computer programming class at any IIT. And so we convinced a professor, Professor Korean, to start a hobby club in computer programming. And that became the beginning of computer science. We are also very lucky because the IIT staff went on strike. Then the computer club was the only club that could run the computer center. So we got full access to the whole computer center. There was 4 16-year-olds that were running the computer center because the staff was on strike. Those were the days of punch cards. But it allowed us to do things that with a little initiative, and I encourage all of you to do this, you can do. People would say, you can't start a computer programming class at IIT, either it offers it or not. A couple of years later, while I was still an undergraduate student, I got interested. I had ADD, I was always interested in new areas. With Professor Guha, who's still active, we started the biomedical engineering program between IIT, 4 students, and AIMS. Out of scratch. There was no program, there was no formal thing, we just started doing it. And I encourage all of you, because there is permission and there's enough smart professors who will encourage you to do these things. So I found it very liberating to be here. It wasn't as rigid as it seemed like Indian educational institutions might seem to be.
Like when I said crazy things, of course, academic part of it is all fine. Anything non-academic?
Oh, there were plenty of things, but I won't talk about them.
I am happy that there are those things.
A lot of ideas were hatched at the chai wala at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Very nice. I think one of the questions since
I was in Nilgiri hostel.
One of the things that many students are confused, in fact this is the question that many ask, what's the relationship between education and entrepreneurship? Students are so restless these days that they start companies when they are in second year on whatever idea they think is important, and it's becoming difficult to even push them out of the system. They get so excited about what they are doing. I think, do you think a real technical degree is really required for entrepreneurship today, or what do you see the role of higher degrees or a PhD in entrepreneurship?
So it depends on the area. You know, if you're starting e-commerce site, it doesn't take a lot of things. You can learn programming on your own in 2 years. If you're trying to innovate in biomedicine or invent new material, a PhD is very important. And so, depending upon the area, now most of the areas I mentioned will need serious technical education, so I don't encourage people to drop out and stuff. The simple things, and there's room for them too, can be done without deep technical education or just an undergraduate degree or half a bachelor's. I think most serious technologies that will change the world will need much more education.
Very good to know. Good that you said that. I hope the students are listening. And in fact, more specifically, do you see a role for MBA degrees, for example? In fact, that's one thing most of our students have decided to do even before they joined IIT Delhi. Do you think what's the role of MBA today in some of these categories?
Yeah, so my view is the following. If you want to be a big company and join a boring company, like Cisco or IBM or GE or somebody like that, an MBA is useful from a career. If you have passion for an area, which is what most entrepreneurs have, they get passionate about an area. 2 years doing an MBA is not as useful as 2 years trying to build a company. So a company is much more education than an MBA. For entrepreneurs, for innovative efforts, I call it imagine the possible and let's just try to make it happen whether you know how to do it or not. I've always done that. It's always worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody, so the luck, like I said, has a huge part to play. At least 80% of my life is about luck. So
that's very, in fact, and I'm happy that you are saying everything, that I tell students, but they think that I say it because I am paid to say such kind of thing.
No, look, there's so many parts in my life. Even when we started Sun Microsystems, we are very successful, but I always looked at it and said, here's these 10 things that are really important for success. We only controlled 3 of them. 5 of them our biggest competitors combined, but they were big companies, so they didn't want to take any risk, and so they were stupid. Companies like Digital Equipment Corporation now just were plain stupid. They didn't take large risks, they didn't pay attention to the startup world, they didn't pay attention to large innovation. They just asked their customers what they wanted, and customers always tell you what's the next increment. If you have 20 megabyte hard drive, they'll ask for 40 megabytes. They won't say, I don't want a hard drive, I want flash memory.
In fact, my comment about students not trusting me was about the MBA part. The luck part I will come to. In fact, you have a very famous quote, you have to do all the right things and get lucky.
Yes.
That's what you said, which was quoted everywhere. And that's almost like leaving things to God.
No, it's not. Look, you have to do all the right things. So you can't not try things and hope to get lucky, because that's failing to try. If you try and keep trying, then maybe you give luck a chance to help you. More mathematically, it's probability. If you're doing all the right things, you're giving yourself a higher probability of success. And then if you're a good entrepreneur and you try and survive longer and longer, because survival is very important in entrepreneurship because many entrepreneurs fail, you're giving luck a longer time to give you a chance or probability to work in your favor. I like to think in probability, but most people understand luck better than probability. But I like to think mathematically, you're giving yourself more external things to come together, find an opportunity as you're iterating and trying, finding a niche to get started in, and then grow from there. Every time you build a problem, a solution, you get an opportunity to do the next big thing. And this is where the exponential nature of these come interesting. At the beginning, startups look like they're growing very slow and are uninteresting. At some point, the exponential learning takes over. And this is exactly why big companies can't innovate, because they don't count on this process. They say, what can we fairly certainly produce with this project?
That's very nice. In fact, before you started Sun Microsystems and became famous, I think your first company was actually the data dump.
Yes.
And both of them had similar investors, similar teams, but one failed.
Let me ask, how many people have heard of this? One or two hands. And I always make this following point. People remember Sun Microsystems and Data Dump were started about 2 months apart and were the same 2 co-founders, myself and Scott McNeil. But nobody remembers the failure. People only remember the success. So as long as failure doesn't kill you, failure doesn't hurt. We learned a lot. Look, we were naive. For both of us, it was our first jobs. We didn't know any better. But we learned. And trying things gives you a chance to succeed. One succeeded, one failed. It wasn't us. It was some things we discovered in one area but not in the other. So I always say, people remember your successes but not your failures. But failures is where you learn the most. Bill Gates has a famous quote. He says, success is a lousy teacher. Because you get arrogant and you make all these assumptions like you know. That's why most of the time, second-time entrepreneurs fail. And first-time entrepreneurs who are not as confident, are more figuring things out, do better.
Yeah, thank you. In fact,
this is cultural.
Yeah. One of the things, in fact, I also recently came to know that, the way you got your first customer in Sun Microsystems is taught in business schools all over the US as part of case studies. Can you narrate that incident? I mean, how you got your first customer for the Sun Microsystems?
Well, so we had this other vision, but we had the hardware, but the software wasn't ready. So we kept saying, who can use the hardware? And there was one company building terminal emulators for IBM mainframes. Most of you probably won't know IBM terminals, but they were terminals meant to operate on IBM mainframes. And we found them and they said, oh, we can build a software emulator, which we've already done on your machine, better than the current hardware. And so it was called Solo System. So in the market we didn't plan. Our first revenue started coming, which gave us a little more time to develop the full Unix operating system. The other thing, it was taking long to develop our own Unix, and somebody else was selling a port of Unix. So we just bought the port and started selling the machines as a ported Unix. Some of the computer science people will understand this better. Yet, we didn't just take a short-term view and say, oh, the port's good enough, let's not invest in enough money in our own. Because our vision was not just a port, our vision was fully distributed computing, which nobody in the world was doing. There was no distributed file system, there was none of these technologies. So we hired the team to build the long-term vision, but we used short-term tactics, whether it was IBM terminal emulators or ported Unix, to serve short-term market. So this idea of being very tactical is important, but having the long-term vision. Now, every company that just did the tactical things didn't become a big company like Sun Microsystems. Those of us who had the long vision, and I talked about a lot of things that were 20-year things today, but did things tactically one little step at a time, that's a very good combination. And so I always encourage entrepreneurs to think, I say, be obstinate about your vision, be very flexible about your short-term tactics. Don't be pure about your tactics.
Also heard this story that your first agreement with a customer was a handwritten agreement at 5 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, that was a negotiating tactic. Yes.
You waited for almost like 12 hours until the customer signed.
Yeah, it's a well-known story on how to negotiate with large customers, but...
Okay. Okay. And also I think one of the things that we're all concerned, which is something that many people ask us, technologies, as long as they are improving our productivity, we are quite happy with them. But now many of these technologies are replacing people. It's all about losing jobs. As a country like India, with 1.3 billion people, where we need to provide jobs, how do you see India should plan for this onslaught of these technologies?
Look, there's the short term, so take the next 10 years. There's the mid-term, say 15 years to 30 years, and then there's beyond 30 to 50 and beyond. There's three different answers. First, I'd say in the next 10, 15 years, economic growth will more than make up in job creation. So I think there's lots of vectors of economic growth and job creation that even though these technologies will improve productivity, they won't affect the overall job growth very much. In the midterm,
the 15 to 30-year time frame. Let me start with the long term and then I'll come to the midterm. In the long term, most of the jobs that exist today, whether it's in India, in China, in the West, are not very good jobs. If you have to work as a farm laborer in agriculture, it's not a very good job. If you have to work on an assembly line, it's a terrible job. If you have to work as a retail clerk, it's not very stimulating. So, most of the jobs that exist today are not very interesting. If AI can do all the jobs, then you have the following situation. Why do you need to work? Okay? I personally believe 50 years from now, the need to work in jobs people don't want to work in, but work at them to make money, will go away. They will essentially be done for free. There will be enough GDP growth to support society without people needing jobs. And that's the long-term view. This current economic obsession is valuable for the next 30 years of creating jobs, but not in the long term. The best oncologists in AI oncologists. That doesn't mean people won't be oncologists, but they will do it because they want to do that job, because they're interested. There'll be a lot more research jobs. It's investigation. There'll be a lot more jobs in art and music and creativity. People will do what they want to do, and their basic needs, the minimum standard of living, whether it's healthcare or education or housing, will be taken care of because it'll be cheap enough because of all these technologies. That's a very utopian vision long term. I think in the middle, we will have a very difficult transition because the capitalist system is geared for economic efficiency. It's meant to increase productivity of goods and services. But if that becomes very cheap, efficiency is no longer the goal. And in fact, we are seeing some of the negative effects of the economic system. All of this controversy around personal data and advertising, getting people to buy things they don't need through data science, getting people to vote a certain way by influencing them. This is all capitalism hacking people's brains to get them to do things that they don't really wouldn't do without that external influence. This is a very difficult period of transition from the current society in the midterm to the long-term society. And I think capitalism will have to change very, very dramatically because the most important thing won't be produce more goods and services, it'll be make people happier. And that is a different goal than capitalism. I think capitalism will have to be modified substantially. 4 years ago, I wrote about the fact that most countries, very long term, will need universal basic income, which you get without working. That'll take care of most of your needs. Housing, transportation, healthcare, education, those kinds of needs. And then there'll be room for capitalism above that. I know it's a radical answer.
No, yeah.
It's very hard to believe looking outside at the amount of need. But think exponential growth. Again, exponential curves are very, very surprising. Most people, I hope, have heard the story of a grain of rice on a chessboard. Right? If you double every square by the 64th square, for those of you who haven't heard the story, you go for 1 grain of rice to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. By the time you get to 64th square, you'll need more grain than has ever been produced in the history of mankind. And that's the nature of exponentials, why they're not intuitive,
and what we can do with technology, what I get very excited about working on.
It's very interesting. That only makes me think, we have these work ethics because we all come to work and spend most of our time in the offices. If you are getting paid and if I have to do nothing, I think you need the leisure time ethics too. What do you do during your
You can
leisure
do
time?
other things you are interested. I don't have to work for a living, but I work easily 80 hours a week because everything I learn is interesting. If everybody could afford to do that, it'd be a wonderful world. And it could be, I'm interested in this, and somebody else is interested in training whales, and somebody else is interested in sports. Right? There's excellence in many dimensions.
Yeah, I think we all want to see that day, so that's nice. So I think just one last question before I open it up to the students and audience. So I think you have been seeing this startup culture for almost like 3 to 4 decades now in Silicon Valley, maybe to some extent in India. What do you think is changing in terms of whether it's culture or attitudes or stereotypes? I think what changes have you seen in the last 3 decades, for example?
Well, the changes have been very, very good. When I started my first startup in 1980, if you said you're going to do a startup, your parents would say, hey, you can get a job at GE and you want to do a startup and take all this risk for what? If you talk to your friends, they said, you're crazy. When I graduated from Stanford Business School, everybody thought it was a bad idea to do a startup when you can get a job at McKinsey. The culture has become much more permissive and encouraging of entrepreneurship. Many more areas are now open to innovation. So previously there was a few areas of skills where you could do startups. Now, no matter where your skills are, you can do a startup. So areas have expanded where you can innovate and be an entrepreneur. Society's support has expanded. There were no programs to encourage entrepreneurship. Now it's culturally accepted. Back then, if you talked to a senior manager at IBM and said, come join our startup, they'd never consider it. Today, every senior manager in every large company wants to join a startup. So everything about the culture has become more permissive, more areas. It's a beautiful time to be an entrepreneur. And a lot more to work on the planet, as hopefully I convinced you today.
That's good. I think just before I open up, like I said, do you have plans to open Khosla Ventures in India, or are you already doing that? Or how do they contact you if they need to contact you with ideas?
Well, my email address was there. I look at my life as where can I be the most productive for every hour of time I spend. Whether it's learning, I still read a lot. I read a lot of scientific papers in a lot of different areas. I'm always learning. I'm always reading. Even when I go on a hike, I'm listening on audiobooks to some area. So I'm a fanatic for learning, and the more of you become like that, the more you can grow. So to your question of India, it's very hard to work remotely in entrepreneurship because it's not about investing, it's about mentorship. And mentorship means face to face. If I'm working with a startup, if they want to hire an engineer, I'll interview him and say, this person will bring this skill and not that. Very hard to do remotely. So I haven't done as much as I would like to. We have a small effort. We are trying to do innovation in some large areas, working with a few people like Nandan Nilekani and others who can expand its impact. But there's plenty of opportunity. I don't have to do everything in the world.
Okay, thank you. If any questions, you can raise your hand and someone will come with your mic. I think. Yeah.
Who is?
Good evening, sir. My question is,
Introduce yourself. Introduce yourself.
yeah, my name is Prem Kumar and I am doing executive MBA from IIT. My question is, technology always comes with a premium. India, which has 60% population, which is underprivileged, how do you think it will be financially viable for startups to get this technology to the large person on the dice? Like who is the large person who is sitting in the corner?
I didn't fully follow your whole question, but let me try. I think I got the gist of it. About 20 years ago, I had this argument. Every government body, every ministry, telecom ministry, tribe, were all thinking that mobile phones were too expensive. They were only for the luxury items, and landlines was the big effort. Despite all their plans, once you got on a cost reduction cycle, it became accessible to everybody. Now entertainment's doing the same, becoming much, much cheaper. I think the same will happen in education, the same will happen in healthcare. It takes an entrepreneur. It never starts low cost. It starts somewhere else and then moves towards this target, depending upon the personal passions of the entrepreneurs who are driving the agenda. So I do believe achieve it. So I'm very hopeful that that will happen in almost all areas. To cut housing costs, we have to do things very differently. We can't produce 10 times the amount of cement used in India and 10 times the amount of water for food and not destroy the country. So all those will come from entrepreneurs driving one of these exponential curves up the accessibility ladder.
Yeah. Who has the mic?
Hi sir, I'm Siddharth here, backside.
Okay, there.
So in your slides you stated that, yes sir.
There.
So in your slides you stated that software is eating the world. So how do you envision startups like Oyo and Stace Villa both onboarding the traditional processes with software and internet? So how do you value them? How do you differentiate both of them? Clearly Oyo copied the entire model of Stace Villa and it became extensively successful, but this closed down. So coming to 5 years before, how do you differentiate it and how do you find that this becomes successful?
Yeah, so, I mostly talked about for people like that. They are business model innovations. They change the business model. So there are many ways to innovate, not just technology. And many of the e-commerce kinds of startups have used business model innovation to dramatically cut the cost of things. So you mentioned Oyo, most people know Ola. Those are business model innovations. The car's still the same, the driver's still the same, just how they're summoned, how they're used, what is the cost, infrastructure, all that has changed. We are seeing a lot of business model innovation in fintech startups. We'll see a lot of innovation in insurance. I didn't get time to talk about it. But all of banking will be disrupted completely because much better, fintech depends on risk models.
Risk models are best done with machine learning systems, not with human scoring based on how long you worked at a job or which job or what you look like. There's a lot of innovation. So that's the other point I would make. There are many, many areas of innovation, and very few have been tried. You just have to be clever about it. Zomato, all those are business model innovations.
In fact, if you think of it in the financial sector, whether you get a loan or not is already decided by the computers, not by the humans. So I think.
One of my favorites is, today if you have Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, you can get wealth advisors. But the technology behind that is almost free. So if you only have 5,000 rupees in your bank account, you should get the same level of wealth advice because it's no cost to get it. Nobody's used that business model. Every bank wants the people with the big bank balances as their customers. I keep saying there's a lot more opportunity among all the people who have very low bank balances. Microfinance has proven that. I worked a lot in microfinance in India starting in about 2000. With Professor Yunus, I did a lot of work and did a lot of microfinance efforts. Huge model innovation. That has become 10 times cheaper now because of technology and business model innovation and machine learning scoring and all that for credit.
Yeah. Next question. Too many. How much time you have?
Could you speak up?
Speak.
B.Tech first year fresher.
B.Tech first year student, just
Okay.
Sir, I want to ask a question that the first 15 employees you employed in your San Francisco company are now running more than 10 companies which net worth in millions. So what the qualities you see when you employed them?
You employed people who were able to multiply your investments by billions, large number. How did you choose those people? What qualities you looked at?
Well, so one thing, when you're an entrepreneur, think of yourself not as the person who invents everything or does everything. You have to do all that in the beginning, but really good entrepreneurs are, I call them instigators of new ideas. They have an idea, they imagine what's possible, but they collect other people with a lot of expertise to help them. This is why one of the words I mentioned is naivete. If you knew how hard it is to be an entrepreneur, you'd never start the company. You have to be a little bit naive. But when you run into a problem and say, hey, I'm 3D printing buildings, but I need new materials, new polymers. Then you hire somebody who's a polymer PhD chemist. So you discover problems and you hire talent. So one of the most difficult things entrepreneurs do is figure out how to harness talent towards their vision. So they are the keeper of the integrated vision, but they use a lot of talent, and hiring people in those areas is one of the hardest skills to develop. Some people are good at it and some people are not.
I think let's have a girl to ask a question. I think all boys, there are the girls.
There's one there in the back with the red shirt.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, please go.
Good evening to everyone present here. My name is Shubhani Singh and I am from GLA University. Right now part of entrepreneurship cell GLA. So my question to you is, like, as a human we are very unlikely to changes. And as you mentioned that in short term, midterm and then in long term, there will be professions that would be serving for, like, the things services would be free. Through the upcoming of AI and the AI technology. So I would like to ask that which profession you think that would would be constant or permanent, or as a youth or everybody sitting here, which skills should we work on? That's it.
It's an important question. One of the reasons I mentioned earlier is no matter whether you're a chemical engineer, have a long career, learning how to learn, learning different models of learning is the most important skill. It's what I tried to describe. I learned at IIT that has served me well. It was quite lucky that I did electrical engineering, but I started computer programming. Then my master's degree was in biomedical engineering. My first work was outside. So every area I did was different, and I learned the skill to generalize. So I would encourage everybody to focus on those skills. There is no one skill that's going to be important for the next 30 years. You'll keep changing the areas that are most important.
Hello sir, for the left. Good evening, Mr. Sir.
One of you,
I have a couple of questions. My name is Rishabh. First is that you often say that an entrepreneur, like audition of entrepreneurship is all about taking decisions. And the toughest decision that an entrepreneur has to make is to listen to different advices and then take the right from the right person. So first question is this, and can you elaborate on how to do better decision-making process on advices? Second question is, as you touched the topic of AI replacing jobs, what are your views on the public policy proposals of UBI, Universal Basic Income, and the reward taxes that people are talking about?
Yeah, so, one of the hardest things an entrepreneur does is to understand whose advice to take on what topic. And that's very hard. If you're trying to hire a marketing person, or you're trying to get marketing advice, if you hire somebody from GE who's done marketing, they're going to give you the wrong advice. Because they're used to marketing in an environment that's fairly constant. In a startup, everything's changing all the time. The advice has to be different. One thing I do is say, get 5 people to give you the advice and use their input as input, not as answers. A good entrepreneur will take advice from lots of different people, but synthesize their own answer. So if you get diverse advice, this is where diversity becomes very important. You're in a better position to make up your own mind. I also think in entrepreneurship, first principles thinking is a very good idea. Experience becomes a bad idea. Because experience is a bias about how things are done in an area. But that's usually meant for incremental innovation. So I find experience is not a good thing to have in startups, which would be good news to all the young people, because it comes with a lot of biases. If you're a very good entrepreneur, you can hire experienced people, take their input, take their questions, their problems they come up with, but not listen to their answers. If you have enough confidence, then that's a very good combination to leverage experience. But relying on experience usually leads to less innovation. That's why if you look across the areas, some of the innovation areas I mentioned, no large innovation I mentioned came from people who had experience. Elon Musk didn't know how to do cars. But General Motors and Volkswagen all worked on electric cars and failed because they had too much experience on how to do cars. Elon just kept iterating and building a better idea. He made lots of mistakes, but he fixed them quickly. He didn't get led to a bad idea. Same thing with Jeff Bezos in retail. He had no idea what retailing was, knew nothing about it. So, look at all the media articles. They didn't know, but they learned from their audience. So, experience is not necessarily as helpful as people think in entrepreneurship. And if you want to be truly innovative, leadership has to operate outside of an area. This may apply to IIT Delhi. I was giving a talk on innovation to Lawrence Berkeley Labs, which is a preeminent research lab. They had an off-site meeting and asked me to do the dinner talk on how to increase innovation at Lawrence Berkeley Labs, which is a large research lab associated with the University of California, Berkeley. And so somebody asked me, how do we increase innovation? I asked the head of material science how long he'd been in the job. He'd been there 30 years. I asked the head of nuclear. He'd been there 20, 30 years. I asked the head of biology. And I said to the director, if you shuffle their jobs, make the head of nuclear the head of biology. These are all smart people. But you need them to think outside their area of expertise to really allow for innovation. I'm a real believer in this mixing it up. That's why interdisciplinary is so important. So take the head of your chemical engineering department, make them head of computer science.
Only the students will complain, otherwise everything will be okay.
I'm well known for my radical ideas, but I have high confidence.
Let him complete first.
So, my name is Kumar Saul, and I run a startup which is called Labify, and we work with scientists a lot. So, continuing your input on research and innovation research, what we do is we provide them a platform where they can buy things and also give their expenses. Now, we have realized that in India, buying things for research is a major problem. Now, with your experience in AI, do you think that the research, the conventional way of research is going to go a long way in the developing countries? Or, let's say if AI takes over, then what is the future of research?
I actually think AI will discover enough new things that the single largest increase in the need for talent will be researchers and PhDs. So, if you read my paper on medicine, it actually makes the point that in 10 or 15 years, we'll have 5 times the number of radical research projects for PhDs than we have today, because they'll open up so many new vistas. So I actually think research opportunities will dramatically increase with the advent of AI.
Sir, you have been raising your hand. Can somebody give a mic?
Let me make just one other point on what I was just saying. How many people are physics students?
Give the mic.
A few physics students. One of the largest questions in physics is dark matter. And if you scan the skies with radio telescopes, identifying dark matter is a very hard problem. So they did open competition among anybody on the planet who wanted to enter this competition to identify dark matter, which is a traditional deep physics problem. The competition was won by somebody who was a glaciologist. He was studying glaciers, glacier fractures, glacier patterns. The algorithms he was developing won the competition for dark matter identification. This is why interdisciplinary is so important. And I can give you 100 examples like this. Yes, please.
Yeah. No, we will repeat the question. You can just ask us. No, I think let's give it. After that, you can ask.
What is the time? Do we know?
It's 5:50. How much time? When do you need?
Okay, we should finish in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
For sure.
Yeah.
Technology also for Very interesting presentation, Vinod. I have got one or two questions. In fact, only just one. You mentioned that 700 million people on this earth are enjoying the riches and comforts, and all the 7 billion want to do it. Which will require a huge change in the society. And you mentioned that technology is perhaps the only answer for bringing about all these changes. One of the big changes which needs to be brought about is to have a boundaryless world. A world without countries, because a lot of social problems will be solved with that, and a lot of shortages will cease, and the wastage which we see between countries will also cease. Are there technologies being worked upon which will lead to a borderless world? You have always projected 2050 as the future, like long-term vision of 2050. Do you see a borderless world then?
Look, it's a very hard problem. One thing I should mention, even when the technology is there, politics and social issues can get in the way. Sometimes, as in stem cell research, religion can get in the way. And we adapt these things as if they are facts. In fact, take stem cell research. It's hugely beneficial to mankind. We've adapted it globally when it's only a Christian concept. There's no reason Hinduism should say stem cell research should be limited. No reason, or Muslims, or any other religion. It's a strictly Catholic Church concept. And it was arbitrary because when the religion was invented, people didn't know what stem cells. So political factors, entrenched factors like religion and other things get in the way. So it is a hard problem. What makes me optimistic is the more people from early childhood participate in the global world, when they can do a search on the phone for more information about the moon or their favorite song, it makes them more global. So I think it will take multiple generations, but my hope is as people grow up thinking that way from when they were 5 years old and using a smartphone, they will become more global. You look at this idea. So let me give you a simple example. Nobody below the age of 50 in the United States reads newspapers. Everybody above the age of 50 still uses newspapers. It's probably also true in India. So when technology came, the old people who were there didn't change their ways, but the younger people. If you look at how many young people talk on the phone, it's very few. They use text messaging. How many old people do? Very few. So as technologies come, the technologies people use when they're between 5 and 20 become the norm. I hope today's 5 to 20-year-olds will become more global citizens.
Sir, I think
develop with global brains.
he wanted to ask a question for a long time. Maybe last 6 o'clock.
This will be the last question.
Good evening, Mr. Khosla. Thank you for a very insightful talk. My name is Anthony. I'm a rising sophomore at Arizona State University and founder of the Delhi Management and Model. I have a few questions about entrepreneurial life.
Not few, one or two.
Put the mic to you.
Okay. What's the name
One
of
question.
factors do you look for in a startup before investing in it? And have you seen the show Silicon Valley and what do you think of it? Because you hadn't mentioned it.
First, I haven't seen very many episodes. I saw 1 or 2 episodes of the show. People always send me snippets when we are mentioned or something. One of our companies is mentioned. I think the most important thing in startups is the quality of the thinking of the founder. And the second most important thing is the kind of team they assemble. One of the most important questions I ask is in 2 or 3 years, who will be the 5 most important people on your team? Where will they come from? What's their background? If they're thinking of a very high quality team, then it tells me they're thinking the right way. Then you look at markets and technologies and other things. I apologize, I have to run, it's late. Thank you all very much, it's great to talk to all of you.
I would like to invite Mr. Rishabh Mohan Sharma to present a memento to Mr. Khosla. I would also like to call upon Mr. Rohit Koshi, President of the Alumni Association, to present coffee book table as a memento to Mr. Khosla. I would like to call the entire AIT team on the stage. I would like to call the AIP team on the stage.
पैसे कैसे देंगे?